Picture this. Normandy, France, June 7th, 1944, the morning after the longest day in history. The hedgerows are still burning. The dead are still being counted. And somewhere in the darkness before dawn, a young American paratrooper from Mississippi is moving alone through enemy-held fields. No backup, no radio contact, nothing but his M1 rifle and the kind of nerve that God only hands out to a certain type of man. His name is Lieutenant WWII. He belongs to D Company of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division. He has been fighting without sleep since he jumped into Normandy the night before. And this morning, he has just stumbled upon something remarkable. A group of German officers gathered in a farmyard, planning a counterattack that could push the Americans back into the sea. Ray steps forward and calls on them to surrender. One German soldier raises his weapon, a Maschinenpistole 40, the MP40. The man pulls the trigger. A burst of 9mm mixed rounds tears through the early morning air, and one of them punches clean through Lieutenant Ray's steel helmet, spiraling around the inside of the liner and taking a sizable chunk of his ear with it. Waverly Ray does not fall. He does not run. He kills every German officer in that farmyard with his M1 rifle, methodically, calmly, one by one, and then directs mortar fire onto the enemy unit that those officers had been commanding, shattering their planned counterattack before it ever began. That German soldier with the MP40, a weapon so feared by Allied soldiers that they called it the Schmeisser and the burp gun, came within inches of ending one of the most remarkable personal combat feats of the entire war. But here's the part the movies never tell you. Even as GIs feared the MP40, they were also desperately trying to use it. They picked it up off the battlefield. They carried it alongside their standard-issue rifles. They coveted it. And in doing so, they ran headlong into a wall of problems that no Hollywood film has ever bothered to explain. This is the story of why American soldiers struggled with captured MP40s, and what that struggle reveals about the hidden mechanics of how wars are actually won and lost. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that button and the bell so you don't miss a single story like this one. We dig into the details that textbooks leave out. To understand the problem, you first have to understand the weapon itself. The MP40, Maschinenpistole 40, or Machine Pistol 40, was the product of one of the most elegant engineering revolutions in the history of firearms. It was designed in 1938 by Heinrich Vollmer, working from earlier prototypes developed at Erma Werke. By 1940, it was rolling off assembly lines in serious quantities, and by the time German paratroopers were dropping on Crete and Panzer commanders were pushing deep into the Soviet Union, the MP40 had become the defining image of the German soldier at war. It was made almost entirely of stamped sheet metal and a synthetic plastic called bakelite. Where previous military weapons had required skilled machinists and hundreds of precise cuts, the MP40 could be assembled by factory workers with relatively basic training. This was revolutionary. It wasn't just a gun. It was a manufacturing philosophy and proof that a weapon could be designed for the assembly line as much as for the battlefield. The result weighed about 8.5 pounds unloaded. It had a folding metal stock, the first submachine gun in history to feature one, that collapsed under the receiver and made the weapon compact enough for tankers, paratroopers, and armored infantry to carry without getting tangled in ladders, hatches, and vehicle crew stations. The barrel was smooth and uninsulated, which meant that if you fired too long and let your supporting hand slide forward off the magazine housing, you'd burn yourself, a real hazard in combat. But the gun was controllable. It fired at around 500 to 550 rounds per minute, considerably slower than the Soviet PPSH-41's blistering 900 rounds per minute, and that slower rate actually made it easier to manage during sustained fire. Allied soldiers who faced it in combat quickly learned to respect its distinctive sound. The MP40 had a particular mechanical rhythm, a lower, slower chug compared to the higher-pitched rattle of some Allied weapons. And that sound became associated in soldiers' minds with German soldiers, with danger, with death. The Germans issued it primarily to squad leaders, platoon commanders, tank crews, and paratroopers. It was not, as Hollywood would have you believe, carried by every German infantryman. Most German foot soldiers still carried the bolt-action Karabiner 98K rifle. The MP40 was a specialist weapon, high value, limited in supply, issued to the men who needed its close-range firepower most. By the end of the war, roughly 1.1 million had been produced, and over 200,000 of them were captured by the Allies. That is a staggering number. A mountain of steel and bakelite piled up in depots and farmhouses and mud-filled ditches from Normandy to Berlin. And American soldiers, practical, inventive, always looking for an edge, saw that mountain and immediately wanted to claim a piece of it. Here is where the real story begins. Because the moment an American soldier picked up an MP40, he entered a world of complications that were invisible to the eye but potentially lethal in practice. The first problem was the most fundamental, and it was one that no amount of bravery or battlefield ingenuity could solve. The MP40 fired 9mm parabellum ammunition. The standard American submachine gun, the Thompson, the M1A1, the beloved Tommy gun, fired 45 ACP. The 45 ACP round was a beast by comparison. A big, heavy, slow-moving slug, a true man-stopper by the standards of the era, capable of hitting a man with enough kinetic energy that eyewitness accounts from combat veterans read like something from a different universe than the more modest 9mm. Carl Cartledge, a paratrooper with the 501st Parachute Infantry of the 101st Airborne, put it in terms that leave little room for interpretation. 3 rounds from a Thompson, he wrote, would lift a large man off the ground and drop him 2 feet from where he was standing. The 45 was built to stop a fight immediately. The 9mm was built for a different philosophy. More rounds, higher velocity, easier to carry in quantity. But those 2 cartridges were as incompatible as 2 different languages. A 45 ACP round is approximately 11.4 millimeters in diameter. A 9mm parabellum round is, as the name suggests, 9 millimeters, roughly the width of a finger compared to the width of a thumb. You cannot use one in a weapon chambered for the other. This is not a matter of adjustment or improvisation. It is physics. The wrong round will not chamber, or it will chamber improperly, or, most dangerously, it will attempt to fire and destroy the weapon or the shooter in the process. This meant that the moment an American soldier picked up an MP40, he had also picked up a weapon he could not feed from his own ammunition supply. Every round fired through that German gun had to come from captured German stockpiles, from dead German soldiers from overrun ammunition depots, from whatever battlefield scrounging the GI could manage. In a sustained fight, this was a critical liability. American logistics, one of the genuine marvels of the Second World War, an industrial achievement that historians still struggle to fully appreciate, was built around 45 ACP and 30 caliber cartridges. The pipeline from American factories to the front lines delivered those rounds in extraordinary quantities, but it delivered 0 9mm. The British faced this problem too, but they had an inherent advantage. Their standard submachine gun, the Sten, also fired 9mm parabellum. A British soldier who captured an MP40 could theoretically feed it with his own ammunition. Different magazines, but compatible cartridges. This is precisely why members of the British 6th Airborne during Operation Market Garden were documented as discarding their Stens in favor of captured MP40s whenever they could. Local commanders apparently tolerated it. The logic was straightforward. Same caliber, better gun, why not? American soldiers had no such luxury. The M3 grease gun, the streamlined replacement for the Thompson, introduced in 1942, was also a 45 ACP weapon. The Americans were committed to their caliber. It was standardized throughout their military systems. The Thompson, the M3, the M1911 pistol, all running on the same fat, heavy 45 round. There was no easy crossover to 9mm. The irony runs even deeper than that. The American Ordnance Department was aware of the problem. They actually commissioned a 9mm version of the M3 grease gun. Around 1,000 were built specifically for the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, America's Wartime Intelligence and Special Operations Agency. These weapons were marked US 9mm SMG on the magazine well. They were supplied to French, Belgian, Dutch, Italian, and Norwegian resistance fighters. Men and women operating behind enemy lines who needed to be able to use German ammunition because they had no access to American supply lines. There was even a proposal to procure 25,000 9mm conversion kits for the standard M3. The Ordnance Committee eventually scaled that down dramatically to just 500 kits, and it is believed only a fraction of even those were ever actually produced. The message was clear. Using German ammunition was a special operations problem, not a frontline problem. And frontline American soldiers were on their own. But the ammunition problem, as serious as it was only the beginning. Even for those American soldiers who did manage to secure a supply of German 9mm rounds, by stripping magazines from dead Germans, by raiding captured supply dumps, the MP40 presented a second layer of problems that were more subtle and, in some ways, more dangerous. The gun had a mechanical flaw built into its very design. The MP40 magazine held 32 rounds. It was a double-column design, 2 parallel rows of cartridges stacked on top of each other, but it fed from a single point at the top. This single-feed design created a structural problem that German soldiers quickly learned to manage, but that captured weapon users, unfamiliar with the gun's quirks, were likely to encounter without warning. When the magazine was fully loaded to its 32-round capacity, the spring tension pushing rounds upward against the feed lips was extremely high. This increased friction made feeding less reliable. The rounds at the top were under pressure from all the rounds below them, and the geometry of the single feed point created the possibility of what gunsmiths call a traffic jam, cartridges wedging against each other instead of feeding smoothly into the chamber. Experienced German soldiers knew this. Many of them loaded only 28 or 30 rounds into a 32-round magazine. That reduction in spring tension made feeding dramatically more reliable. It was one of those pieces of tribal knowledge that never appears in any manual. The kind of thing you learn from the veteran in the foxhole next to yours, not from any document the Army hands you. An American soldier picking up a captured MP40 off a dead German would not know this. He would likely load the magazine to full capacity. That's what you do with a weapon you just recovered. You want it fully loaded. And then, at the worst possible moment, in the middle of an exchange with the enemy, the gun might jam. There was also a second handling error that became notorious. The MP40 was designed to be gripped at the magazine housing, the rectangular metal enclosure into which the magazine was inserted, not at the magazine itself. The magazine was not intended as a handhold, but under combat stress, with adrenaline flooding the body and time running out, soldiers frequently grabbed the magazine to steady the weapon. This instinctive grip could flex the magazine lips, the 2 precisely shaped pieces of metal at the top of the magazine that aligned rounds for feeding, pulling them slightly out of alignment with the feed path. The result was a malfunction. The bolt would pick up a round at a bad angle, the round would fail to chamber, and the gun would stop firing at the worst possible moment. German instructors drilled their soldiers on proper grip obsessively. American soldiers encountering the weapon for the first time on a battlefield had no such training. The U.S. War Department, to its credit, was aware of these problems. Before the Normandy landings, the Signal Corps produced an instructional film, Enemy Weapons, German Infantry Small Arms, that walked American soldiers through the operation and disassembly of German weapons, including the Karabiner 98K and the MG42. The film was created specifically for commandos and paratroopers who might need to use enemy weapons after their own arms were damaged or lost in the drop. It was a remarkably forward-thinking piece of preparation for a military that was simultaneously doing 1,000 other things to prepare for the most complex amphibious assault in history. But a 12-minute black and white film, watched once before an invasion, is not the same as the accumulated knowledge of a trained German soldier who had carried this weapon through months of combat. The American soldier with a captured MP40 was always, in some fundamental sense, improvising. And then there was the most invisible problem of all, the one that could get you killed not by the enemy but by your own side. The MP40 sounded German. Every soldier on a WWII battlefield was trained, consciously or unconsciously, to distinguish the sounds of friendly weapons from enemy weapons. The crack of the M1 Garand, the mechanical bark of the bar, the familiar chatter of the .30 caliber machine gun. These were the sounds of safety, the sounds of friendly fire, the distinctive slower rhythm of the MP40, the sound that veteran soldiers called the burp gun that had been associated with death and danger since the North African desert and the Italian mountains, was the sound of the enemy. When an American soldier fired a captured MP40, he was announcing to every Allied soldier within earshot that a German weapon was being discharged nearby. In the fog of combat, in the smoke and confusion of a firefight, where visibility was often measured in yards rather than miles, that sound could be a death sentence. Friendly soldiers might instinctively orient toward the sound as a threat. Their reaction time, their training, their survival instincts, all of it was calibrated to treat that sound as something to shoot at. This was not a theoretical concern. Friendly fire, it's what military historians politely call fratricide, was a constant danger throughout the war. It was estimated that a significant percentage of all battlefield casualties in World War II were inflicted by friendly forces. The chaos of combat, the smoke, the noise, the darkness, the sheer impossibility of tracking every moving element on a fluid battlefield, created conditions in which mistaken identity was a persistent and lethal hazard. Carrying a weapon that sounded exactly like the enemy was an act of courage bordering on recklessness. A soldier with an MP40 in his hands was, in a very real sense, wearing a disguise that his own side might see through only after it was too late. And the visual signature of the weapon made things worse. The MP40's silhouette, the side-folding stock, the pistol grip, the elongated magazine dropping from beneath the receiver, was completely unlike any American weapon. At the distances where combat frequently occurred in the hedgerows of Normandy, the rubble of Aachen, or the frozen forests of the Ardennes, a soldier with an MP40 looked like a German soldier. This is why the official American military position on using captured enemy weapons was complicated. The regulations allowed it. Capturing enemy weapons and putting them to use was entirely legal under the rules of war, and the U.S. military even made official allowances for it. But practical guidance was clear. Using enemy weapons in active combat was fraught with danger, and commanders varied significantly in how much they tolerated it. Some officers, like Captain Willis Cole Jr., are documented as having used captured MP40s as personal sidearms, a trophy that was also a functional weapon. But this was personal choice, operating in the margins of official policy. The Army's official supply chain, its official training, its official doctrine, all of it was built around American weapons firing American ammunition. Against all of this, it is remarkable that American soldiers used captured MP40s as much as they did. The temptation was real. The MP40 was, by any objective measure, a fine weapon. Its compact size, especially with the stock folded, made it practical in situations where a full-length rifle was a burden. For soldiers clearing buildings, working in the close confines of the Hürgen Forest, moving through the ruins of bombed German cities, the short, maneuverable MP40 offered a genuine tactical advantage. The slower rate of fire made it easier to control and more ammunition efficient than the faster Soviet designs. The folding stock, the first of its kind on any military submachine gun, had inspired post-war weapon designers for a generation. There was also the psychological dimension. Carrying a German weapon was a statement. It was proof that you had been in close enough contact with the enemy to take something from him. In a war where personal proof of combat was currency in a particular kind of masculine accounting, the MP40 on a soldier's shoulder carried a weight beyond its 8.5 pounds of steel and bakelite. But the weapon was always a compromise, always an improvisation, always something that existed outside the system, dependent on ammunition that the American supply chain couldn't provide, operating at the edges of safety in terms of friendly fire risk, maintained by soldiers who had learned its quirks from the battlefield, rather than from any formal instruction. The British were better positioned to use captured MP40s, and they did so in greater numbers. The logistical compatibility with their 9mm Sten was a genuine force multiplier. But even British soldiers faced the same friendly fire acoustic problem. The sound of the weapon was indelibly associated with the enemy, and no British soldier could fire an MP40 without risking being shot at by his own comrades. There is one more layer to this story that deserves attention. What the MP40 did to the Americans who studied it rather than captured it. While frontline soldiers were struggling with the practical realities of using this weapon in combat, engineers and weapons designers back home were taking it apart on workbenches at Aberdeen Proving Ground and other research facilities, examining every stamped plate, every spring, every bakelite grip panel, and asking themselves, what can we learn from this? The answer was a great deal. The M3 grease gun, which began entering American service in mid-1944, was explicitly designed after the Ordnance Department studied both the British Sten and captured German MP40s. The design philosophy was the same. Stamped metal construction, simple mechanism, designed for mass production rather than mechanical elegance. The M3 was cheaper, simpler, and faster to produce than the Thompson. It was not as beloved. GIs called it the grease gun, with the same mixture of affection and mild contempt that soldiers reserve for utilitarian tools. But it worked, it was reliable, and it could be produced in the quantities that industrial warfare demanded. The folding stock of the MP40 would inspire a generation of post-war weapons designers. The Soviets incorporated it into the IPBS-43. Some variants of the Kalashnikov AK design used a similar underfolding mechanism. The concept of a compact, folding stock infantry weapon, once a German innovation element, became a global standard. The MP40's magazine design, problematic as it was also studied and adapted. The British Sten used a very similar single-feed double-column design and inherited the same reliability issues. The lesson was eventually learned, though it took years. And the manufacturing philosophy, the idea that a weapon could be designed for the stamping press as much as for the soldier's hands, reshaped how every major military in the world thought about small arms development in the post-war decades. The MP40 that American soldiers struggled to use in combat became, in a different form, a blueprint for the weapons that would arm the next generation of American soldiers. Wars are won and lost in the details that no one thinks to mention until decades later. The American soldier of World War II is rightly celebrated for his courage, his adaptability, his willingness to improvise under fire. Those qualities were real, and they contributed enormously to Allied victory. But that same adaptability had limits, and the captured MP40 illuminates those limits with unusual clarity. You can pick up a weapon. You cannot pick up a logistics system. You cannot pick up a supply chain. You cannot pick up the accumulated training of an army that has standardized every rifle, every pistol, every submachine gun around a single caliber of ammunition and built a global industrial machine to keep that ammunition flowing to the front lines. The American soldier who picked up a captured MP40 was brave and resourceful. He was also operating in a kind of military shadow, outside the system, dependent on battlefield scavenging, carrying a weapon whose sound could get him killed by his own side. The German soldier who handed over that MP40, dead in a ditch in Normandy or a cellar in Aachen, had understood something fundamental. A weapon is only as good as the system that supports it. The gun without the ammunition is a club. The gun with the wrong sound is a liability. The gun without the training is an accident waiting to happen. The American military understood this too at the institutional level. Their logistics were the best in the world. Better than the Germans, better than the British, better than anyone's. Their supply chain crossed an ocean. Their ammunition flowed in quantities that the German military could not match or even fully comprehend. American soldiers were never supposed to need German weapons, because American industry was supposed to ensure they always had enough of their own. And largely, it did. But war is not largely. War is the exception. War is the moment where the system breaks down, where the plan falls apart, where the paratrooper lands in the wrong field and the resupply doesn't come, and the soldier in the hedgerow finds himself with a German gun in his hands and no German ammunition to feed it, and he makes do with what he has because that is what soldiers do. Lieutenant Waverly Ray survived the German burst from that MP40 in the Normandy dawn. He lived to fight on through the summer of 1944, but he did not survive the war. A German sniper's bullet took his life on September 19, 1944, during Operation Market Garden, the same operation that saw British paratroopers discarding their Stens for captured German guns. He was 25 years old. The guns outlasted the men who carried them. The MP40s captured in France and Italy were eventually collected, catalogued, shipped to depots, redistributed to Allied governments. Some went to the Norwegian Territorial Guard, which didn't retire its last MP40 until 1990, 45 years after the war ended. A handful turned up in the hands of the Viet Cong in Vietnam. Some survived into the 21st century, discovered in Yugoslav armories, or recovered from Middle Eastern conflicts. A machine built of stamped metal and bakelite, designed for mass production and early obsolescence, outlasted empires. In the end, the story of the American soldier and the captured MP40 is not really a story about a gun. It is a story about the limits of improvisation, about the difference between a weapon and a system, about the invisible infrastructure of war that sits behind every individual act of courage and determines more often than any single act of heroism can, which side wins and which side loses. The greatest weapon the United States brought to the Second World War was not the M1 Garand, though that rifle was extraordinary. It was not the Thompson or the M3 grease gun. It was not even the atomic bomb. It was the American supply chain, the ships and trucks and depots and factories and ammunition trains that kept 8 million soldiers supplied across 2 oceans. That is the weapon that won the war. And it is the weapon that made the captured MP40 a curiosity rather than a necessity. Remember that the next time you see a GI in a movie carrying a German submachine gun and looking cool while doing it. The reality was messier, more complicated, more dangerous, and, in the end, more human. That is where history lives, in the mess, in the complications, in the gap between what looks heroic on a movie screen and what actually happened in a muddy field in France in the summer of 1944. If this video gave you something to think about, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves military history as much as you do. Leave a comment below. I read every one of them. Click the like button and hit the bell so you never miss a new story. These histories deserve to be told, and there are many more still waiting.